Welcome to the wonderful world of wine. We are your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find us on our website, thewww.wine. Welcome, everybody, to the wonderful world of wine. Kim and I are here today to talk all things wine with you. How are you, Kim?
Pretty good. How you doing?
Pretty good.
Good.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, it's
We're
all good.
excited today. We have a very special guest. Andrea Eby is here. How are you, Andrea?
I'm very well, thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much. I've been bugging Andrea for years to be on the show, and I'm glad we finally have her here. For our listeners, Andrea is a wine educator, a wine judge, a sommelier. She is the Italian program director for the Wine Scholar Guild, and she is an Italian wine ambassador through Vinitaly. And I hope, Andrea, you can start off by telling the listeners your wine background, and if I missed anything in there. I know I missed a ton of other wine things, so please tell us about your background.
Sure. I think maybe I come from a slightly unconventional sort of wine background in the sense that my career has really developed around Italy, but I am based in Winnipeg, Canada, so far away from any wine region. I grew up in a very kind of rural part of Manitoba in Canada on a farm, and so have this love for agriculture, for that kind of lifestyle that I think has been part of the attraction towards wine and viticulture. But I also was lucky enough that my grandmother was British, and she just had a love for food and for wine and for culture that I was fascinated with from a young age. And so when I went to university, I chose to follow in my mother's footsteps and pursue a degree in education, and with a specialization in geography and history, because to me, those were kind of the two areas I was passionate about. And those three things, in terms of history, geography, and education, have really served me well as I transitioned into the wine world. And I worked as a teacher in the public school system for about 10 years before I had my children, and decided that I needed to talk to adults in the evenings. And so I started taking some courses at night just to kind of get out of the house once a week and pursue something for myself. And so I chose to take some wine courses at a local school here in Winnipeg. And I took them with my best friend, and we did, I think, 2 courses together. And at the end of the second course, I was like, okay, what are we going to take next? And she was like, that's enough for me. I'm done. I know enough now. I was like, no, not me. I want to keep learning. And so I went on to pursue my sommelier certificate here in Winnipeg doing that. And then kind of decided at that point that I really wanted to try a career in wine. So I switched to teaching in the public school system to teaching about wine in a private wine store here in Winnipeg. Then went on to do my diploma through the WSET by traveling to London, England to do that. And really, that I think it was a great experience in the sense that it really introduced me to a huge group of people, of peers that I have kept in contact with for many, many years since then, who, the wine world is small in that way. A lot of people know one another, and that opens up a lot of opportunities when you know the right people and people respect what you do. Once I had my diploma, I was doing more teaching. I was working for a store here in Winnipeg and moved into the buying side of things as well, and did that for about 10 years until I was offered the position with Wine Scholar Guild to take over their Italian programs. And and then it's been firmly kind of focused on Italy since then. And I love to learn. And so I have continued doing things such as the VIA program, the Vinitaly Ambassador program, pursuing my Master's of Wine right now. So I'm a stage 2 student in that. And I have opened my own company and have a school here in Winnipeg and now one in the neighboring province in Saskatchewan, and work as an agent representing Italian wines in Manitoba, and then also doing some consulting work for Italian wineries that are looking for representation in other Canadian markets. So trying to connect them with agencies that I think will work well with their wines and are a good personality fit, etc. So lots of things going on.
You have a very, very full schedule, it seems.
Yes. Yes, I do.
Fingers and lots of pies.
Yeah.
One of the constant themes that we seem to run into when we have conversations with people in the wine world is this non-linear career trajectory that so many people that we talk to. There's no like right or wrong answer to how do you build a career in wine, and there's no straight path. So I think it was really lovely to hear about yours, sort of similar to mine, where it's like you got bit by the wine bug and you're like, I think this is what I want to do. And that focus on education is something that Mark and I like to kind of always focus on, because we feel like that's at the root of getting people interested and excited about wine. Is you got to learn a little bit about it. I like the way that you approach it, but then you have your own continuing education as well, so you're kind of doing both sides of the deal.
Yes, I think it's really important to realize in this business that you can know a lot, but there's always more to learn. And then every year you have a new vintage and everything changes, right? And so you're constantly pushing yourself to keep kind of abreast with everything that's going on in the business. And it's a really interesting time to be in the business. There's lots of other issues that I didn't really think when I got into that you would have such kind of so many social issues and political issues that are now part of what you're doing and what you're planning for. And so, yeah, it's never a dull moment. That's for sure.
Andrea, both Kim and I have taken and taught Wine Scholar Guild programs, and I'd like for you to explain the Guild and the Italian Wine Scholar program to listeners who have not heard of this program, or people who are interested in Italian wine looking for something to take. If you could explain that to them.
Yeah, absolutely. So the company was started by Julien Camus, who is a French native. So he lives in Alsace, but for a period of time, he was working in Washington, D.C. and working in the kind of promotion of French culture, food, wine, etc. And he realized that the average kind of consumer in Washington didn't really know a lot about French wine, and it was difficult to promote something that people didn't have a lot of knowledge about. And so he created, with the help of some wonderful educators, he created the French Wine Scholar program. And that was kind of where the company started. And it was quite successful because people were really attracted to this sort of deep dive into a particular country, which WSET is fantastic, but they do more of the kind of like broad level looking at things, right? You learn a little bit about Italy, you learn a little bit about Spain. These kind of programs are very much, you learn a lot about these particular places. And so once we had some students who had gone through the French Wine Scholar program, they're like, okay, like what's next? I want to learn more. And so the next program to be developed was the Italian Wine Scholar program. And then they have since gone on to develop Spanish Wine Scholar. And we are very close to launching German Wine Scholar later this year. So the Italian program is a little bit different in the sense that Italy has a lot of appellations and a lot of grape varieties. So we break the program into 2 units called Unit 1 and Unit 2, but they're not kind of sequential to one another. You can take Unit 2 before Unit 1. But basically, Unit 1 covers the northern part of the country, and Unit 2 covers the central and southern parts of the country. And we really do cover every DOC or DOCG in Italy. So some of them in much greater depth, right? The more kind of culturally, commercially significant appellations do get a lot more sort of word time, playtime in the books and on the webinars and that sort of thing. But we do try to be a comprehensive resource for people as well, so that if you want to know where a particular appellation is and what it's known for, that we have an entry in the book that tells you about it. But really is that kind of comprehensive look at the grape varieties of Italy, the appellations of Italy, the wines of Italy, and then sort of wrapped together with cultural elements, historical elements, this sort of thing that kind of give a little more color to a lot of facts. And we try to make it a course where you learn a lot, that you also kind of have fun doing it as well. Quite recently, we've introduced the Italian Wine Essentials, which is sort of like Wine Scholar Light, I guess. It's instead of, having 500 appellations, we're looking at sort of 35 different appellations, some of those really kind of more recognizable appellations that people really associate with Italy, and making it sort of a more manageable, fun kind of dip your toe into Italy. But a lot of people who do take the essentials then definitely go on to take Scholar because they're kind of bitten by that Italy bug and they want to learn more.
Yeah, we teach both levels, I guess all levels at the Commonwealth Wine School where I manage. And so I don't focus on Italy. We have specific Italian instructors, but the rollout of that essentials program was really exciting. And we had sort of been really waiting for that to come out. Yes, it's like Scholar Light, but it's great introduction to really anybody who doesn't know a whole lot about wine, but really is curious and interested and wants to taste some wine, but also really wants to start understanding the concepts behind Italian wine because it can be so complicated. And when you see that shelf of wine in front of you at a store or on a wine list and you're like, what the heck am I going to choose? It's really, really, I think, essential to have that just a little bit of knowledge. And then you feel so much more competent in making some choices.
Yeah. And I find like I get a lot of great feedback too from younger people who are maybe starting the service industry, right? And they're working in a restaurant that has a very Italian focused list. And I can remember, when I was in that position, it is overwhelming when you look at this big list and you think, oh my gosh, like I know two things on here, right? And so giving them that kind of boost of confidence, that little bit of comfort level so they feel that they can have a conversation with guests and feel some confidence when they're having those conversations. That's been super rewarding to hear people talk about that. And also some of the people who are looking at traveling to Italy for the first time, they love that little kind of, there's always that in the essentials, there's some space devoted to kind of food, regional foods, and there's space devoted to kind of touristic things that you might like to take in while you're in this area. And people really like having that kind of, it's not just wine, you're learning about other parts of the culture in the country.
I like that you said taking a deep dive because as Kim and I took the French wine scholar and the Italian wine scholar came out, we're wine geeks. We're always looking at taking wine education. But it was intimidating for me when I saw there's two books. And oh my God, the French thing was bad enough. It was one book. Now we have two books. I have to take two tests. I have to pass both tests.
Yes.
It is kind of scary, but that deep dive really draws you in. And I just noticed that you now have master classes, correct? Like you did, the French has master classes in Burgundy and Champagne. And now in Italy, it looks like you're going to do one on Piedmont and Valpolicella.
So I'm teaching online more of a kind of introductory sort of level course for Valpolicella for the Consorzio. So it's just two kind of online sessions and then people take an online exam. And it kind of is sort of the entry level step to becoming a Valpolicella educator. And so it's kind of the way that you start that pathway. But on the other side of things, we are working on the Piemonte master level. So yes, France so far has kind of had the monopoly on Champagne master level, Burgundy master level, that sort of thing. So we are working on developing that for Italy. And we hope to start with Piemonte and then probably move on to Toscana. So kind of, the big areas, the focus
The easy ones. The easy ones,
the
right?
easy ones, there's only 180 some MGAs in Barolo, right?
Jeez.
So this will be the place where, you'll have more opportunity to kind of really even go further down, drill further down into places like Barolo, Barbaresco, the places that, yes, we devote some pretty good time in the Italian Wine Scholar program to kind of explaining these areas, but, we don't have the space in the textbook to go into individual kind of cru expressions of wines and really looking at like producer styles and this sort of thing. And so the master level will give us a chance to really offer that perspective for people.
I think it's nice to hear about all of the progress that the Wine Scholar Guild has made in the last few years. Like there are all these new programs that are coming into play. And I like that there's, not only the focus on the essentials, but then also on those master classes too. So it's kind of growth in two different directions. It's like you want to create the programming that's appropriate for people who are just getting into it. But then also folks like Mark and myself and other people who've been in the industry for a long time. I know that I can't wait to take the Champagne one. I'm going to do that in the fall. But, you've got levels for everybody. So
we're trying. And, we just had a discussion as a group today. We were talking about at Wine Paris. I don't know if you're familiar with Areni. It's like a kind of think tank organization for wine and the wine industry. And they did a presentation on sort of rethinking wine education education. And some of the people we attended the live session, and then the rest of us that weren't at Wine Paris this year were, reading over the recommendations and things like that in their report. And it is really that kind of trying to develop that sort of two-prong approach, because we want to keep offering opportunities for our kind of loyal customers who love what we do and want more. And at the same time, we need to make sure that we're not forgetting about those younger consumers and how are we attracting them into our business, into this industry, and how to get them to love wine as much as we love wine, right? And so, it's trying to balance those two things is tricky. Thankfully, I'm not in charge of doing all the balancing, but I appreciate that it's not an easy task, that's for sure.
You're listening to The Wonderful World of Wine, and we are your hosts, Mark and Kim. You can find us at our website, which is thewww.wine. You can also find us on Facebook at The Wonderful World of Wine and our past episodes on SoundCloud. We are supported by Franklin Public Radio, and as always, we welcome your questions and comments. And our guest today is Andrea Eby, and her website is vinsanity.ca. Welcome back, everyone. Today, our special guest is Andrea Eby from Vinsanity, as well as the Wine Scholar Guild. She is Italian Programs Director.
Yes.
So you're a Canadian.
Yes, I am.
What about Italian wine specifically grabbed your attention and has led you to this point in your career?
Well, I do have to thank, I think, one person, one family for me ending up in this kind of situation of being obsessed with Italy. So when I first started taking the wine courses, I started taking these classes at this store called Banville & Jones, which was owned by two sisters who were of Italian heritage. And their father had actually immigrated to Canada and started a very successful business, which is still known today as Transex Trucking. And Luigi Tolani was his name. Once he found success, the trucking business, his dream was always to go back to Italy and to make really good wine. He had sworn that after he left Italy, he was never going back to drink poor wine. And so when he made his fortune in the trucking industry, he went back and he purchased a winery in Castelnuovo Beredenga in Chianti Classico and completely renovated and upgraded the winery. And so this family that I was taking the courses from and eventually started working for had this connection to Chianti Classico. And I was very lucky to be offered a position with the company, with Banville & Jones, began teaching there and then eventually buying there. And that entailed visits to the winery in Italy. I just fell in love with the culture. I had visited before as like a university student, right? But it's a whole different kind of mindset when you're one age as opposed to another, and fell just in love with the culture. And I became very good friends with the people that were the winemaker at the winery at Tolani and the agronomist. And those are still lifelong friendships that I have continued. They've since moved back to their homes in Veneto and started their own projects there. But that connection with Italy was really kind of cemented through that. And I just decided that at that point, I thought, you kind of need to almost pick an area to sort of define yourself. And I loved the wines and I loved the culture, loved the food. And I just couldn't think of any better place to kind of focus my efforts and my attention on.
Yeah, great choice.
Yeah.
Great choice.
I haven't regretted the choice.
You mentioned rethinking wine education, the way the Guild has approached teaching wine. When it comes to Italian wine, I always like asking people this because I always struggle with when I do Italian classes. What do you feel is the most difficult thing in Italian wine to teach somebody? Is it the understanding of the laws? I mean, the culture everyone kind of picks up on. It's easy to show them a map and say, anywhere you look, there's wine. But what do you feel is the most difficult thing for even as the director of the program to put out there?
I will say that one of the common things that I notice, say a lot of students tend to start engaging with Wine Scholar Guild through the French Wine Scholar. And I'm not sure, why that is. It's just maybe France is that very classic area. And so that's where people kind of start. So they go through the French Wine Scholar program and then they decide, okay, I'm going to tackle Italy. And it's like a deer in the headlight kind of thing thing when they open that book and they see how many grape varieties there are. I think that's one of the big things that really kind of scares people initially, is that there's just so many grape varieties that you've never heard of, right? Because even somebody who, say, loves Chianti, they don't necessarily know that Sangiovese is responsible for Chianti, right? So there's this, they've probably heard of Bordeaux and they've probably heard of Burgundy and this kind of thing. They've probably heard of Chianti, but outside of that, how many of these wine areas and these grape varieties have they kind of encountered in their sort of daily life at the restaurant, at the wine store, this sort of thing? So I think grape varieties is a big kind of thing that does scare people initially. And then I think it depends too on what your kind of comfort level with geography is. I do find there's a difference there. If people are sort of very kind of spatially aware and minded, and they have that kind of mental map of Italy in their head already, it's much easier to kind of anchor a grape variety to a place, to a wine, to this kind of name that is made up for the appellation, that sort of thing. But if you don't have that mental picture of kind of Italy and the regions and where everything is, especially in relation to the seas and the mountains, because all those things do impact the wine style so much, it's almost hard for me to kind of imagine what that must be like, because when I close my eyes, I just see it. It's just burned in my mind at this point. But if you don't have that, it must be really difficult to try and categorize all these things. And as I say, kind of give yourself that mental picture of where everything belongs and why it tastes like it does. And I do try when I'm teaching online to really always kind of use that WSET approach, in the sense of like talking about like, why is your wine taste this way? Like anchoring it, like what's in the glass and why does it taste that way? And looking back to geography and variety and all those kind of factors that lead to this thing we love in the glass. But yeah, there's just a lot of information in terms, and a lot of it, like you say, you were speaking about, you're Italian, right? It's a language that people have a lot of anxiety about saying things incorrectly, I find too.
Right.
Because
Especially when you go there and your Italian is super rusty like mine.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it's a counterintuitive if you read it just like you would read English. You don't say a lot of the things the same way we would. And so
Yeah.
I find it's also that kind of thing. It's much easier for me to remember something if I'm not also trying to remember, how do you say that word? How do you spell that word? Right. And so I think
Yeah, but it always brings up more things to research for me, because I'll give you an example. Pronunciation. I hear shows from Italy where they say Prosecco.
yes.
And they say that is the way you say it, but here we say Prosecco. And I have Italian friends, they're saying Prosecco. I'm saying, well, wait a minute. The Italians in Italy are saying Prosecco. So
Yes.
that type of stuff is just kind of the weird things about. And
I
and
know.
people say things differently all throughout Italy. So it just
Yeah.
gets more and more confusing.
I'm still trying to teach my mother to say bruschetta. I don't think it's ever gonna happen.
I don't think mine would ever say bruschetta either.
But I know what you mean, because sometimes I say something here in a kind of true Italian accent or a pronunciation, and people look at you like you're absolutely crazy, right? So you have to balance
Like
the two.
bruschetta.
Like bruschetta or pistachio, right? Those words
Right.
just don't resonate with English for sure.
I do love that you bring up the geography part of it, because one of the things that has always stood out to me about the Wine Scholar Guild curriculum is that the maps are excellent. So having that really good resource and a visual resource, because different people learn different ways, and having that visual reminder and with such focus about where everything is, it really does make, at least it did for me as a student of the program, really learn the stuff
Good.
a whole lot better by being able to see really clearly where everything was and what are the important regions. And I distinctly remember learning about Chianti and Chianti Classico and all the subregions of Chianti, and the map was just super because you got to see where everything was, and it's like, oh, that's why Chianti Classico is what it is. There it is, right in the middle of the region.
Yeah.
And it
exactly.
made so much sense because the maps are so good. So
Well, I'm
kudos to
glad to
whoever
hear
your
that.
map people is.
Yes, well, we are very lucky to have Quentin Sadler, who's based in the UK, who is a fantastic, I'm not sure what the official map maker term is, but we work really closely together to try and make the kind of most readable simple yet comprehensive maps. So like when we were redoing Unit 1, revising it, looking at Piemonte, which is like, if if you're students of Italian wine, it's this like layer upon layer upon layer of like appellations that are just like overlapping each other. And we spent a long time thinking about how do we divide this chapter up so that it makes the most sense for people, and how do we portray that best on the map so that people can clearly see which appellations are where and which ones overlap. And it's a challenge. And there is some places I remember in Liguria, one appellation, I think I read every document I could get my hands on in Italian, trying to because in the disciplinary, they have like the descriptions of the borders of the appellation. It's like runs from Nona's fence to the, the creek that whatever. And we were trying to figure out where exactly this one line on the appellation was. And at one point we just kind of said, we're just putting the line there because I don't even think the Italians know where this line is, right? Yeah, it's a lot of work to try and get those in a kind of state that we know people will find them really usable and helpful. And that is something I always recommend to students when we talk about like, how do I study for this exam? I always say, like, for myself, printing off those blank maps and trying to put the appellations where I think they are and remember what the mountains are that are important there and the lakes that are important there, and just try to see how much I can recall on this blank map really helps me kind of make a decision about what I need to focus on for the rest of my revisions and that sort of thing. So totally agree with you that the maps can be a huge resource when it comes to remembering this stuff and making real meaning out of it, not just memorizing facts, right?
Yeah, the understanding as opposed
Yeah.
to just the memorizing. It's like it's one thing to know the information, it's another thing to actually understand and conceptualize it. And then you understand what those layers are all about in Piedmont.
Right.
I want to talk about the Italian Wine Ambassador program through Vinitaly because a lot of our listeners might not be familiar with this. And just a few things. Is this still only less than 200 people that have that?
No, you know what? Actually, I will I glanced at it today on Instagram because I think Stevie Kim had just posted something today, and it was like a new update on how many people have achieved sorry, let me see if I can quickly find it because it was maybe it was on just a story.
I mean, you were talking
430 people. 430? Yeah, in 50 different countries now.
Wow, it's amazing.
Yeah.
The reason I bring it up is because it is a different level than the Wine Scholar Guild. And having taken the Maestro class, and the way it was explained to me, the difference was you're going to get in more into the grapes. People get afraid of Italy because there's, thousands and different names for different regions. So I just want your feedback to give to the listeners about that program, your experience with that, and how it compares to the Guild's program, and if there's any similarities or major differences.
Yeah, I would say that you're correct in the sense that I do find the VIA program, a little more grape focused, and they very much focus on like the families of grapes and the kind of connections between the grapes. There's a lot of kind of historical emphasis put on like the history of the grapes and that sort of thing. In the past, I think that our two programs were seen more as like competition for one another. And now in the last few years, I think we've kind of come to understand that really they're quite complementary to one another. And that when I was speaking to Stevie Kim last year, we were talking about the two programs, and, she was saying how many people were kind of taking our course as almost like a preparatory class for that course after, right? Because then it's like you have that kind of basic knowledge about the grape varieties from our course. You kind of have that geography set in your mind. And then that really kind of focused approach on the grape varieties isn't as intimidating once you have that really kind of solid base. And so I think, I've spoken to a lot of people who've gone through the program quite recently, and a lot of them have taken the Italian Wine Scholar and just commented about how much it helped to prepare for the Vinitaly Academy. And personally, I am still really involved in that organization. And for me, one of the kind of highlights of that organization is just how well they have managed to create a real community of people that have taken the course, that have, even if some of the people haven't been successful in passing the exam, they really feel welcomed into that kind of community. And chances are they'll challenge it again, and they'll do it until they pass, because they really want to belong to this organization. And they do a really great job of bringing everybody together for things like 5-star judging for 5-star. Not everybody gets to go to that, but they're always kind of bringing in a selection of people who have gone through the program and giving opportunities for, getting together at Vinitaly and this sort of thing, and kind of keeping that community of people all kind of together and vibrant. And again, people I know have said it's kind of like when you belong to a community of people like that, when somebody in California is looking for somebody to, there's a job opening, they put it in our little chat group and it's open to this community of people. If somebody's visiting a certain wine region, they're no problem asking for recommendations or who can you introduce me to somebody. And that for me is a really special part of the community for sure.
Yeah. That's why we call this the wonderful world of wine. It's
Exactly.
stories like that, connections.
Absolutely.
I'd like to always give listeners tips, Kim and I, about shopping for wine. Can you give your best or quickest tip for a listener when they're shopping for Italian wine in either retail or looking at a wine list? What is Andrea's number one tip?
Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a tricky one. I mean, I definitely think that I tend not to go for the most expensive or the least expensive, but there's a lot of really great value in that sort of around sort of $20 range. There can be a lot of really great things there. So don't think you have to spend a ton of money to get a great wine, especially when you're talking about Italy. And I don't know, I think for me, it's like, I always say I'm kind of like lightning. I never strike twice in the same place. And so be adventurous and like try that grape variety that you've never tried before. And just, take a little bit of a risk and don't always stick to the same thing. But also at the same side of things, like if you know what you like, don't be afraid to ask somebody to, if you're in the wine shop and say, this is what, this is why I liked this wine. What else can you recommend that kind of gives that same sort of style or would you think would appeal to me? And, there's a lot of really talented people that work in wine shops and they talk to a lot of people every day and they taste a lot of wine. And I think it's just, to me, it's a bit of a shame when people, yes, you can find a favorite wine, but there's so much out there. And especially in Italian wine, there's just so much diversity and so much to discover. And a lot of it, as I said, is not overly expensive because it's not really famous, right? There's great varieties that people just aren't familiar with. Today, I was tasting with a group of people and introduced like 18 sommeliers and restaurant people to Verduna Pella Verga, right? This grape variety from Piemonte, the Pella Verga Piccola, that nobody had ever tried before. And it's super exciting to see the look on people's faces as they're like, wow, like this exists. I've never had it. How did I not ever have this before, right? And I know I'm going to have people now asking me, how do I get my hands on more of that, right? So just being a little adventurous and trying something. And yes, you can buy stuff based on, the nice label, but sometimes there's really good stuff that's hiding behind a not so fancy label.
Yeah, I agree. Years ago there was a saying, anything but Chardonnay, right? ABC, anything. Now I
Yeah.
tell people anything but Pinot Grigio when you're talking Italian. Try to get
Yes.
people off the Pinot Grigio.
Well, there's so many great alternatives to Pinot Grigio. Not,
Yes.
sorry to all the
Yeah.
Pinot Grigio producers, but when I pour, say, like Gavi or Cortese, like to people for the first time, they're like, wow, like where's
Yeah.
this been all my life, right? It's there's so many great wines out there that we need to, just spread the word, be a little brave, try something new.
Great. Andrea, we appreciate your time and talking Italian wine with
Yeah,
us.
thank
One of
you.
the favorites. We appreciate it. Thank you
Well,
for the
thank
time
you.
and
Thank
thank
you so much for the invitation.
thank you for being our first guest from Canada.
Oh, I'm honored. Hopefully not your last Canadian on the
I hope
podcast.
not.
Well, it was really lovely to talk with you both, and I hope someday I can visit you there.
Yeah, when you're in Massachusetts, come pay us a visit.
Absolutely.
Thank you for joining us today on the wonderful world of wine. We've been your hosts, Mark Lenzi and Kim Simone, exploring all things wine with you. Today's special guest was Andrea Eby, is the Italian wine program director for the Wine Scholar Guild. You can find the Wine Scholar Guild at winescholarguild.com. Andrea's website is vinsanity.ca. You can find out more about Kim and I on our website, thewww.wine. Our program is supported by Franklin Public Radio, and you can find all our past episodes on SoundCloud and iTunes. Cheers.
Cheers.